Okay, I'll mute everybody and then we'll make a start. Okay. So, has anyone got a question or anything today? Yep. Feel free to start.
uh, is in a hospital, and the boy I see, I always in a room in a hospital bed. It's like I am hovering over him. I'm looking from a corner of the hospital room. Um, do you engage with that, or just leave it like a picture and blessing the boy? What do you in case like this? What do you then?
Um, well, if you see something like that, then it's really seeking revelation for each instance. What is it that the Father's wanting you to do?
Mm-hmm.
So you have a mandate then to outwork that. And I think that's the key in any situation. When we see anything, we always have to ask, is this just for me? Is this something I need to intercede for? Is it something I need to engage in? And the key, Jesus only did what he saw the Father doing, and that's the key really in everything, making sure that we see what the Father's doing, and then we have a mandate that gives us authorization to do something and
Mm-hmm.
to outwork that. Um, you know, if we just see a picture or we see something like you just said, a hospital room, you know, it, if you know what the Father's doing, then you can then, with confidence, either make declarations or, uh, you know, deal with what spiritual dynamics are going on around that picture as you get further revelation. And I think, if ever anyone's unsure about what to do, the best thing to do is just go back, take that back to God, and ask Him specifically and directly.
Yeah.
And I think that's a key in everything. Really, we really need to develop being able to hear the thoughts of God or the voice of God, whether we call it that still small voice, but we really need to be able to get a two-way conversation established in doing that. And I practiced a long time to develop that ability to be able to ask God something and to get an answer directly back.
Mm-hmm.
And I practiced that um, mostly to initially around the Word of God and meditating around the Word of God, so that I had a flow of thoughts that came from God about that word that I was meditating around, and that's how I began to learn to pick up the spontaneous flow of thoughts, impressions, feelings that would come when I began to engage around the word. And then once I began to then operate more visually and use the screen of my imagination to picture words or scenes or Jesus, or to engage in that, then I learned how then to engage with the pictures or with the images in the same way. But when you speak and you see a vision, that either communicates to you as you're watching the picture, and you can see someone talking to you in the picture, but in the end result, it's the same thing. You get a flow of thoughts to your mind. When you hear someone speak, you're seeing their lips move, but the sound is actually pressure waves which come through the air and come into your ears, and your auditory nerve sends information to your brain, and your brain interprets that information as sounds. you know um, and it's exactly the same when we're communicating with God. We receive information which is interpreted in our mind as his voice, you know. And it's exactly the same as when we're speaking to somebody in the natural realm. We interpret that in our mind, what they're saying, and the same thing with God, we interpret it in our mind. It's just practicing, learning to listen, speak, and expect a flow of his voice to come back to us, you know, and it being confident that his voice, you know, comes with practice and with discernment. And you know, a lot of people say, well, how can you discern that it's God's voice and it's not just your own or it's some other voice? Well, you know, there's basically 4 sources of wisdom it talks about in James. There's wisdom that comes from above, which is from God. There's wisdom which comes from the enemy. There's wisdom which is our natural wisdom that we pick up from the world around us and culture. And then there's wisdom that comes from ourselves, what we've learned. And we need to be able to distinguish between all of them. But I think when we're coming to God and talking to him, we need to be confident and in faith that he's going to speak back to us. And you know, it says again in the Bible about that confidence, that we receive that confidence by faith. And after we've learned to continue to listen and to discern what it is that God's saying, Jesus said, you know, if you ask the Father for something good, he's not going to give you something bad. So if you ask for bread, he's not going to give you a stone. If you ask for a fish, he's not going to give you a snake. You know, so we have to have confidence that when we come to God and we're speaking to him and asking him for revelation, or we're asking him to speak to us, then he's going to speak to us. You know, and obviously having a background understanding of the nature of God and the character of God, which is revealed in the Word, then that gives us a plumb line or something to gauge it against. But your own mind cannot make up new things. It can only bring things out of that which is from your previous experience. And so when we speak to God and he tells us something which we didn't know, then that is coming from his heart, his voice to us. And I think it's a really, really important area for a lot of people, because they're just not confident in getting that flow and expecting God to speak. You know, I expect God to speak to me when I ask him something, because I'm in a conversation and a relationship with him. So I've learned to journal what he says without analyzing or trying to interpret until afterwards. You know, I don't try and interpret when he speaks to me. I write it down and then I revisit it, and then I ask him more about it once I've begun to meditate around what he said for revelation about what he said. Sometimes we can block a continued flow of revelation because we're trying to engage our mind to understand it rather than our spirit to receive it. And when our spirit's received it, then our mind can be led by our spirit in understanding, rather than rationally trying to work out something that he said. We can allow our spirit to interpret that and to release that to us from a flow that comes from our spirit connected with God. And it's something we just have to continually practice. You know, but it really is valuable to have that flow of revelatory understanding that comes from God to us. You know, because it really helps when we ask him something and we get an answer. You know, but a lot of people just haven't practiced actually listening for the answer and being able to receive that answer. And of course, you obviously have to make sure that there's no blockages, and that we're not blocked up with sort of negativity or fear or doubt or things like that. They will hinder a flow of thought, because the enemy will bring anxiety and worry. Seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, and everything else will flow. And we don't need to worry or be anxious or be concerned if we're seeking first the kingdom. And so I think hearing the voice of God is really important in this process, because then we can ask him anything. So yeah. Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, I have a question concerning when, as you know, I've been going to the court for the situation around, and when there's kind of not a really change, I got the thought there might be kind of also a delay in the heavenly realms, and then I got the idea to give the divorce papers over that situation to the angels. Is that right? Could I do that?
Yeah, okay, of course you can. Yeah.
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 And just would you repeat that, or is it a one-time thing?
Well, there's a sense that when you're dealing with an issue in your own and you're looking to be free from, let's say, something that the enemy has tried to hinder you with or afflict you with, maybe it's a pattern of behavior or thinking or a stronghold of thinking, then yes, you go and you stand in identification with that, you accept the judgment of God and receive those separation orders or papers or mandates to operate, and then if you release that for the angelic realm to operate in their part of that, whether that's something that's operating in the atmosphere of the earth over you, something in the culture of the place that you're living, there can be different things associated with those things that affect us. But we have to then bring those divorce papers into this realm and administrate them. And so we have to enforce them. Just because you have a court order doesn't mean that automatically someone will abide by it. You have to enforce the order. And so if let's say a thought, let's say you're trying to break a pattern of thought over your life, and a thought comes to you, then you use your authority to rebuke that thought and command it to go. And you stop the thought being meditated on. So you take captive the thought and use the authority you have to see that thought banished and dismissed. Now, after a while of doing that, what happens is the enemy stops with the thoughts, because he knows that he's not going to take you by unawares, because you are consciously standing against those negative things with the authority that you've received from heaven. So for a while, sometimes we do have to stand and use that authority a number of times. And if it was persistent beyond dealing with that a few times, then I would say that it's probably operating from a familiar spirit, and that familiar spirit I would take back into the court specifically and release the judgment of God against it. But you don't need court orders more than once. You sometimes just have to enforce them, because sometimes in the natural realm, if someone disobeys a court order, then you take them back to court. They're taken back to court, and the judge enforces the order on them, and with consequences if they don't abide by the rules of the court. So these things work out similarly in the realms of the kingdom. We get the authorization and the authority from heaven, and we begin to outwork it on the earth. But if the enemy does not comply with the order coming from us, then we take him to comply with the order coming from God. And they don't like being judged and come under the judgment of God. So that is very, very effective. And if we continue, then they will cease. That's what my personal experience is, that they cease operating. If you're doing it on behalf of somebody else, then that's obviously slightly different, and we can't necessarily enforce for somebody else. We can just stand on their behalf and open them up to the presence of God and the moving of the Spirit in their life, but they have to agree to surrender and agree to come into alignment with that. But generally, when we have a specific authority and power in a particular area, then we need to administer it from that sense of authority and power, and not to be doubting or fearful, and not to be thinking, because the enemy will always try and confuse or trick us to operate in doubt and unbelief. And so if something doesn't work the first time, don't get in doubt and unbelief. The enemy always, it doesn't work, I'm not going to stop. And those, it's just lies. You dismiss those things with authority and power, and just stand in faith. Stand in faith and use that confidence that you have in what God has said, in what you've done, and use that confidence to enforce the authority that we have. A policeman has authority, but not everyone listens to it first time. Sometimes they have to take someone and put them in handcuffs and take them to the police station to deal with them. And it's the same in the realm of the Spirit. We have authority, but we have to exercise it and ensure that that authority is being operated according to, and it's a process really of dealing with it sometimes. But yeah.
And then it would be okay, as I've gone through this protocol, that I could give it then actually to the angels to continue on my behalf, or would this be then not necessary anymore? It was just the impression that I could get more support from them in it.
Yeah, well, you have guardian angels that are there to minister to you and through you and around you in the unseen realm around us here, which we need to cooperate with, and we need to release, to bring favor and blessing and different things. And you've got the angels who operate in the realm of heaven. And so if you have something that you want enforced against the enemy, then yes, you can certainly assign angels to do that, and to release them to do it. So long as you have a mandate, then they will operate according to that mandate that you've got. And so yeah, there's no reason why you can't do that. But that doesn't remove the responsibility for us to make sure we guard what we think and what we say that's in agreement and alignment with the mandate we have. Because as soon as we do not stay in agreement, then we give the enemy access, because we're not operating ourselves under the authority that we have. And so it's very, very important that we continue to maintain faithfulness and perseverance, and don't allow what we say and what we think to bring anxiety or fear or doubt or unbelief. Those things just give legal rights immediately to the enemy. We've got to maintain our thinking. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. We speak according to that which is an overflow of the heart, so we need to make sure our heart is cared for, looked after, that we guard the soil of our heart, that we don't allow things into our heart which will cause fear or unbelief or doubt to operate there. Proverbs 4 talks about the guarding our heart, because that's where the flow of life comes in. It says, be diligent to guard your heart, and it's a key. We have to, we can't just dismiss our responsibility. We have to maintain our own life and look after our own garden and make sure that our everything we think and say and do is in alignment with what God says. But as long as we do that, then there's no reason why we shouldn't see continued favor and blessing and victory and outworking in our lives. But there are times and seasons when we do have to go through the desert place, and we do have to learn to walk things out, because those do work perseverance, and they work faith and patience in us, and they produce transformation in us. And sometimes it's quite difficult to be seeing everything from that perspective when it's hard and when we seem to be struggling with different things. But so long as we look after our life, then we trust that God is going to look after those other things around us, particularly where other people are concerned. If our goals are dependent on what other people do, then those goals can always be undermined. And so we need to make sure that the things that we can do are according to what we have authority to do, and then as a result of that, we then see God do his part. And sometimes that means God has to remove people and change situations and circumstances around us. We manage our own circumstances, but where some other people and other situations are affecting us, and we've handed those situations over with God, then we have to allow him to deal with them. And he's a gracious God and a loving God, but he also is a God that will operate with justice. And sometimes bringing righteousness and justice into a situation will severely affect other people if they don't come in line with God. But yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
I would like to know, how can we connect practically to personal angels?
How can we connect with our personal angels?
Okay.
Yeah, well, the first thing to do in terms of connecting with the angelic realm around us is to have a belief, that we actually have angels. The first thing, okay, the Word of God says that those angels are ministering spirits for those who have the heirs of salvation. So everything starts in the Word. So the Word says that they are there to minister for us and to us. Once we've established that, then by faith we can look to engage with what we believe. If we don't believe it, we can't engage in it. So we have to make sure that we believe it first, and then our engagement can operate according to our belief. So that in expectation, faith is the evidence of those things that we're expecting. So we have to expect that we can engage, talk to, speak to the angels, and communicate with them around our lives, and then that will begin to manifest in different ways. And again, it comes down to then being able to receive the information, whether it's via pictures or words or impressions, from that realm. And so you have to practice in the same way. If you want to visually see the angels, then if you've not opened the eyes of your spirit to see in that realm, then you begin to engage with the eyes of your heart and use your imagination to connect up so that God can show you pictures or visions of the angels that are around you. And you may get that as impressions to start with, or you may get pictures, or you may just get revelatory information. So, you know, I would, in terms of looking to engage with those, I would ask Jesus to introduce them to you. It's always a good place to start, because then Jesus will help to unveil that so that you can begin to engage with them. If you don't see anything, or if you don't really get anything very specific, then by faith begin to assign them. In acknowledgement that they're there, most people certainly have at least two. In acknowledgement that they're there, I would begin to send them out each day to protect me, prepare my day, bring favor, make sure the right connections are going to take place during the day. I would do that, whether I could see them or not, because I believe that they're there, and I believe that they're there to minister for me, to serve me. And so if I need specific things in the realm of the kingdom, I would send them out to get that. Whether that would be, you know, sometimes you can send them ahead to prepare the way so that things will be favorable for you and upon you. You know, and you can do that whether you see it or not. You just have to believe and then release them. You know, you can, if you're going into a difficult situation, or you're going into a situation which may be dangerous, then you assign them to protect you and keep you safe. You know, if you're going on a journey, I always send them ahead of time to make sure that I'm going to be protected on that journey, and I'm going to have a smooth journey, and things are going to be prepared ahead of me. You know, if you want to really engage, then you have to have developed the capacity to engage by either hearing them, by addressing them and speaking to them and getting a flow of thoughts that come back to you from them, or using your imagination to engage them. And that's what I would do to start with. I would say, okay, Jesus, I'm going to close my eyes. I'm going to ask you to just reveal those angels to me. What do they look like? You know, what are their names? And ask him to show you and to tell you. Now that might come in a picture, it may come in thoughts, but start there, you know. And if you engage with Jesus in relationship, then you know you're expecting him to give you what you need in that relationship. And so engaging your personal angels is a key. You know, I can often see into that realm, and if I choose to see what the angels look like. Now, they will look like, when I look, something according to the prophetic revelation that the person needs to receive. And so what I see may be different from what other people see, because I'm seeing it from a prophetic perspective. So the person may receive revelation of the purpose of that angel, the weapons that they have, the colors that they have, which are an indication of certain symbolic things in the realm of the kingdom. And that's how you may initially begin to engage yourself. You know, ask questions. You know, what are they here to minister for? You know, how are they supposed to help me in ministry? You know, ask questions of God to unveil the things around that whole situation that you're looking to engage deeper in. You know, but it starts with faith, and then it starts then with personal engagement specifically. But once you can see in the realm of the spirit, then you can begin to engage there. Now, personally, I don't really need to see those angels that are around me. I just speak to them and tell them to go. So I'm not really looking now for just a visual thing, because I know who they are, and I know that they will respond, because I've spent a number of years developing a relationship with them, and most days I I speak to them, and I command them things, and you know, sometimes in ministry situations, one of my angels will bring me things to minister with when I'm praying for people, you know. But then that's a partnership that's developed over a period of time, in which, you know, I've learned to see what they do, you know. You know, one of my angels is a white-winged horse, you know, and it brings things to me out of the realm of heaven, usually carrying things on its back, gifts, different things I can minister with. You know, one of my other angels, you know, is a breakthrough angel that ministers with me to cause breakthrough. You know, and I become aware of them. So a lot of it depends on where you are personally, spiritually, in having developed the ability to see or hear or to feel those things. But you know, the more practice you put in, the easier it becomes. You know, that's the key in everything. It's practice. You know, when I first met my angels, Jesus introduced them to me, and then I spoke to them, found their names, and then over a period of time, I began to discern more of what they were and how they functioned around me. You know, and of course we have legions of angels that are at our disposal. A lot of those don't operate in the realm around us. They operate in the realm of atmosphere of the earth or in the heavenly realms, but they're available. You know, and they did come and minister to Jesus in the wilderness, and they came to minister to Jesus in the garden. So they can come and minister to us to help us in what we're doing in alignment with what God's purposes are for us. You know, sometimes they have to engage and get us out of trouble when we're not following the purposes of God, because they are assigned to us to help us. But it's much easier when we're flowing in the river of God and with the life of God, and they love to be involved in helping us outwork our destiny to fulfill God's purposes for us. Yeah. Is there anything sort of more specific you wanted on that?
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
I would like to experience more about these four phases of God, like practical, maybe a practical exercise. So I've heard a bit from you and also Ian Clayton, but I have not so much engagement with it yet.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. It is a really key area, because it helps us with our daily outworking of seeing into the purposes of God for our life, because the four faces of God manifest around the cherubim on the ark. You know, when the high priest went into the ark once a year, he began to sing and speak and chant the names of God. And the names of God, the four letters of God's name, which is technically called the Tetragrammaton, and it's the letters that they weren't allowed to speak, or they weren't even allowed to write them. They had to write them vertically, so that because they treated them with real reverence and respect. But when the high priest began to engage the name of God, God's presence manifested between the cherubim, the wings of the cherubim. And that is really what we look to engage with. Now, in the heavenly realm, we get the privilege to be able to replace Lucifer, who was the covering cherub, So I know Ian talks about that being true replacement theology, that in heaven we get to replace Satan effectively. So we get to be able to look as the covering of the presence of God, to look into his will and to begin to discern what his will and purposes are. And so that's a very key function of engaging the four faces of God. Each of the four faces of God represents something of his nature and character. The lion, the kingly function; the ox, the prophetic; the eagle, the apostolic; and the man, the priestly function. And when we step into that place of being in him, because our lives are hidden with Christ in God, then we can begin to see from the perspective of being in the center of him, in the center of his will, being in the center of the revelation of his purposes. And in reality, there's a whole manifestation which comes with his presence, which brings past, present, and future together. And so in the Hebrew culture, the end and the beginning met, so that the end always meant a new beginning, and then that led to an end which led to a new beginning. It was always circular, it was not linear. And so we can access the purposes of God in that way, so that we can see into the future and bring the future into the present, and we can look into the past and see the effects of the past changed over our lives. And so engaging the four faces of God is, for me, something I do every day so that I can get a mandate for the day. It is like what Jesus was doing when he saw what the Father's doing. I can be in the center of his purposes. I am like in his name. And in reality, the very name of God, the Yod, He, Vav, He, representing those four letters, the reality of it is, in Jesus, there is a fifth letter, and that is the letter of the Hebrew letter Shin, which means that we are now in the name. So we have been incorporated into the name of God. So when you pray in the name of Jesus, you're not using it as something you tag on to the end of a prayer. Literally what you're saying is, I am in his name, therefore I have his authority to declare, to decree, to speak, to act. Because literally we are in him and in his name, because he's incorporated Shin, which is the letter for the symbol of man, into his actual name. So what was Yod, He, Vav, He in the old covenant, if you like, now in Jesus becomes Y-E-S-H, but it's like U-H. So in it, it's like Yeshua, because Jesus, the letter J did not exist in the English language. It was a Y, so which represented Yod. And so those four letters become five in now that we are in him and in his name, and therefore we can speak from his name. So that's really the significance of being able to step into the presence of the ark and into him, is we can speak and see from his name, and that means that we can engage in the revelation that the four faces bring to us, to be able to bring out of heaven that which we've seen and to outwork it here on earth. So it is a really, really important place to find engagement. As we go there, we can engage with the will of God, and we can begin to resonate with the frequency of the voice of God, because God's voice carries authority and power, and when we come into agreement with his voice, then we come into alignment and we begin to speak with that authority and power. And when we come, we open our hearts, and God begins to touch our hearts and align our hearts with his will and purpose, and therefore the desires of our heart get transformed when we come in him. and we are contained within him, and therefore we can bring out from within him the desires of his heart aligned with the desires of our heart. And again, it takes practice, and it's building up the confidence in being able to go and step in there, but we certainly can do that. And so if you want to do that, we can engage in that place. It's stepping into the realm of heaven, and engaging around the presence of God by faith, and we allow Jesus to be our guide, and he guides us around his presence there. So if you want to do that, I would just encourage you to close your eyes, and in closing your eyes, begin to just think about him. Think about Jesus. Think about Jesus as the one who's through the veil of his flesh has opened up the way for us to step into the realms of heaven. Just think of Revelation 4. Behold, a door standing open in heaven, and just hear Jesus invite you to come up here. So just take those steps of the invitation to come up here and step through this earthly veil. Jesus is standing in the door, which is open, and he is inviting you to come. So take his hand and step with him through the veil, and just begin to sense the freedom and the atmosphere of heaven, the glory of that atmosphere. Begin to breathe in that atmosphere. Just sense what it's like to be standing with Jesus in the realm of his presence. Now just allow him to take you through the veils. There are veils of the way, truth, and the life, which will take us through the different realms of heaven. And what I would encourage you to do is just actively choose to surrender yourself as a living sacrifice to him, Jesus, your high priest, to prepare you to surrender to him, to the dividing of soul and spirit, of thoughts, intentions of the heart, and to bone and marrow. And as you yield your life at ever increasing levels of surrender to him, he can begin to transform you. Now, so just allow him now, as you surrender, to take you through the veil of the truth. And in the tabernacle of heaven, you go through the light, past the light, with the table of shewbread and the menorah, representing the light of the seven spirits of God and the revelation of God for you. So again, just allow him to take you through the veil of the life, and go through that veil, and he will just bring you before the ark of his presence. Now just stand before the ark, take your place as one of the cherubim to look into his presence, and just begin to think of his name and that you are in his name. Yeah, just sense that presence of God, the name of God, you being in the presence of God, centered in his will. Sense the lion, the ox, the eagle, and the man as they just rotate around in the presence of God. You may feel drawn to one of the faces. If you do, just begin to meditate around revelation of the lion, or the ox, or the eagle, or the man. Just open your heart and allow him to begin to align your heart and the desires of your heart with his will for you, with your scroll. If he has a specific mandate for you today, do you look into his will to see what he's doing? Just open your heart to that mandate. Ask him if there's anything specific that he wants you to know for today, and just wait on him to speak. You may feel a sense of his voice, of an impression of his voice. Just begin to tune in to his voice. Just begin to allow that to come around you, the sense of his presence to come around you. Now, as your heart is touched, you received any mandate from him, just allow Jesus to take you by the hand. Allow him to direct direct and guide you and lead you. As he takes you through a doorway, and takes you to the mountain, to begin to outwork that which you've received from him. To sit on your mountain, there you are enthroned with a crown and a scepter and a mantle, and that which you've seen or felt in his presence around the ark, begin to administer from your mountain. You may declare, you may decree, you may call forth, you may engage the angelic realm and ascend angels on assignment. Just feel the authority that you have to administer the kingdom around your life from the mountain in the realm of the kingdom of God. As you operate in lordship, just begin to engage from the perspective of one of the four faces of God. You may feel led to operate in the priestly function. Therefore, you call forth blessing over people. You release upon people that which you receive. You may operate in the kingly function, that you bring order. You begin to direct things to align with the purposes and will of God. You may operate from the prophetic function, as you may release prophetic, revelatory declarations that again bring alignment to God's purposes over the spheres of influence that you've been given. Or you may operate apostolically. You begin to see like the eagle from a higher realm of perspective. So you see things around you from a different perspective, a heavenly perspective, that gives you insight into releasing apostolic order, strategies around your life. Just sense anything you need to release the angels to do into the atmosphere to prepare the way. Now, as you just step back now from that realm of the kingdom, you can step back through the veil into this realm, but you carry with you that which you received around the ark of his presence. You carry within you, in your heart, alignment and transformation of the desires of your heart. You may bring with you revelation of his voice as he spoke to you. Now, as you operate in this realm, you operate from the authority that you've released in that realm. Okay. Okay. Right. I'm sorry, Christian, you joined us in the middle there, so you stepped into an exercise. But it's nice to see you. Feel free to share anything you want to around about that, what you engage with, if you want.
So I didn't hear anything specific, but I sensed strongly the presence. So can I just release that by faith at the moment?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
But thank you so much. It was very helpful to get all the puzzle pieces together. Yeah.
Okay, no problem. Okay. Anyone else want to share anything? No? Okay. Hi, Christian. It's nice to welcome you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, good. All right. Okay.
Yeah. For me, it was great. I just came from home, from work. I could go right middle in it. It was great. It was very, very strong.
Okay, good. Excellent. Very good. Okay, well,